What's up, guys? Laura Whitmer here, owner of Strategic Test Prep, and I'm so excited for this video today because this is different than any video I've ever done. I have a special guest on my channel for you guys. She is a college planner with inside information about the 2023-2024 college admissions cycle. So if you are a student that's applying to college this year, or if you're a parent of a student applying to college, this video is perfect for you. Stick around and we'll give you all the juicy tips. So first, let's talk about test optional policies.
Okay. So it's an ever-changing discussion. And I will always say every year check the individual schools because they could change their policies. And as you know, two schools have kind of gone back that we talk about, MIT and Georgetown, to saying you must submit SAT scores or an ACT scores for our evaluative process.
Right.
They value it very much. And then you have schools like Columbia that's saying they are indefinitely, they're the first Ivy to say we will be test optional forever. So still 96% of all colleges are test optional at this point.
Okay.
August 1st is when the new requirements come out.
Right.
So what we want to do, I always tell students, is when that date comes, go through it with your list and find out which schools are test optional, which schools are require it as a requirement. And then also to keep in mind that you might send those test scores to certain schools on your list and you might not send them to certain schools on the list. And primarily that's because what I tell my students is I do encourage them to take the test to see how they do, because usually that's kind of a marker to kind of see where they could go, knowing they could improve by 200 points or the ACT some certain points. And then basically based on the school's overall profile of average acceptances, they usually put a middle 50 percentile. So if your score, your super score, your score falls in that upper 50 percentile, and definitely if it falls in the top 25 percentile of all the students that were accepted to their class last year, you should be sending that test score.
Okay, that's good to know. So if you're in the upper half of the data, send the score in.
Yes, because it can help in their reading rubric to add to your application.
So it sounds like for the most part, you encourage your students to take the test to see where they fall. Are there instances where you would tell a student, listen, I don't think you should take a test, or I don't think that you should submit scores, aside from being below the 50%?
Yes. I have students that I've worked with in the past that have test anxiety, but they're straight A students. And so there's other ways we can build their application profile to make it strong without throwing in there a low test score. So if they have a learning difference, or they have a lot of times, those are the type of kids that I usually say, okay, maybe we should rethink where are you putting your time and effort? And is it worth putting time and effort into prepping for a test that you might never even meet that 50 percentile? When you're a straight A student, we can develop your story in a different way, have a highlighted aspect to your profile that helps with that rubric review. In college admissions, there's usually soft factors and hard factors. So the hard factors are your GPA and your rigor of your curriculum within your school.
Okay.
And then the standardized test scores. Those are the hard factors. Those are things you can't change.
Right.
The soft factors are the ones where it's, again, much more of a holistic review. And so if you choose not to submit test scores, then that's what I try to do with students, and say, okay, then let's work really on those soft factors to see how you can shine in a different way if it's not through test scores.
Now, just to clarify, for everybody that's watching, when you say rigor of schedule, you mean like if they're taking APs or IBs and stuff like that?
Correct.
How much does that factor into it? Is that like a super important part of what they're looking for?
For the more selective schools, yes.
Okay.
For state schools, it does not factor as much.
Right.
So, but for the more selective schools, the Ivies of the world, they're definitely looking at the rigor of the curriculum within the school context. So if high school doesn't offer the IB or AP courses or honors courses, they're not going to hold it against you. But if they see your school offers 10 APs and you haven't taken one, but you have a 4.0 and someone else has a 4.0, but they've taken 5 APs, it matters.
Well, and not to go off on a tangent, but I want to touch on that because my son is in a district where they don't have APs and IBs. And what I fear as a parent is, how are these colleges going to know that our school doesn't offer that? Like, how can they get a handle on what high schools offer and what they don't? Do they know?
Yes.
Or do you have to advocate for your kid?
No, they do a very, very good job of knowing. That's why they have regional reps.
Okay.
When you hear a high school will announce this person's coming to visit your school from X university, or there's a college fair, their job is to understand the school. And also when the school submits the transcript, they submit a high school profile. So every high school has a profile that actually tells you, what percentage of kids go to 4-year colleges, what percentage go to 2-year or to the military,
right?
And then what programs are offering. And a lot of schools we see a trend dropping the APs. And so that also would say in the profile, we're looking to kind of shift away from APs and just stick with accelerated honors courses.
So speaking of like going to college fairs, I had a booth at a college fair last year and I'm all excited to be there, but I noticed the Harvards, the Princetons, the Yales, they're not showing up for these things anymore.
Why do you think?
Maybe because they don't have to? Is that what's going on?
Right. Yes. Their yield rate is so high.
Yeah.
They don't so they can use their time in a different manner.
Right.
They have so many other opportunities in a college admissions office to nurture clients and find the right fit, or nurture students and trying to find the right fit to mold your class. But when you have a yield rate above 80-90%, it's not as necessary to do that.
So if like, let's say, you know, my son wants to apply to Harvard or Yale, is he going to be at a disadvantage if they're not sending a rep so they don't know as much about our school? And then there's all these other kids that have applied that do have APs and IBs, or will he be okay?
He's going to be looked at within the context of within the context.
Can you guys tell I'm scared about my son? He's 7. He's got like 10 years to go, but that's okay. Before we keep going, why don't you guys do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button if you're liking this video so far and finding it helpful. We're going to move into early round trends next. So this is kind of big these days, right? Like people are applying early. So what's trending right now with like early round stuff? Let's talk early action, early decision.
So that's another change that we've seen in the last few years, is some schools now are offering early decision and early action.
Okay.
It makes it even more complicated.
Yeah.
Early decision is the binding, you must go.
Right.
Unless you can prove that something financially has come up, you can get out of that agreement, just so you know.
Okay.
And you can prove that. Early action is you do not have to go if admitted. And a trend we're seeing is in years past, we would see a lot more students being admitted early action to a school like UVA, for example. What's happening is there's a less and less number of students are being admitted then. They're moving them to regular decision because they have early decision. Those kids are definitely coming. So that helps with their yield. I think they already have those students are going to be there. They're coming for sure.
Right.
The action, they're not sure.
Right.
So they're deferring more because they're getting more applications and record number of applications. So we do not be surprised if you're applying to a school like University of Michigan and 5 years ago, a student with similar numbers might have been accepted early action. They likely will be deferred. And the other thing I always caution about is with the more selective schools, if you're deferred, you still have a very low chance of getting admitted regular decision.
Wow.
With the high top schools, it's really hard because they're looking to see how you fall within the regular applicants and there's a bigger pool. But for the bigger state schools, so like if you're thinking of maybe like a Yale might have a 5% acceptance of those that have been deferred or less. Whereas a University of Georgia, if you're deferred in their early action round, it's like 50% acceptance. So it really depends from school to school, but you can find these numbers on their websites. It just requires a little bit of digging.
Yes. That's so interesting. And you bring up such a good point, because I know I'm working with clients right now who really are under the impression if they apply early action, they have a way better shot of getting in. But if so many people feel that way and they're having so many people apply and it's not benefiting them because they don't know if they're going to commit or not, I can totally see how now the trend is changing.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that there isn't a slight advantage. There is.
Right.
The biggest advantage is early decision.
Yes.
Because they know you're coming and that helps with, again, their yield.
Yeah, that's a good point. And you guys, if you're not familiar with what Amy's talking about with yield, it's basically the percentage of students that they accept that actually come to their school.
It's also better for the rankings. And that's another reason.
That's what I was going to ask.
That's another reason why schools look at their yield rate, because when their yield rate is higher, it actually does help and factor into one of the factors of how they are ranked.
On the U.S. World News Report,
And there's more than one school for everybody. I always say that. It doesn't have to be the number one on the list.
Right. That is so true. But that being said, with early decision, you know, let's just clear the air here. Is it still that case where if you pick an ED school, that's the only school you can go ED, right? Like,
correct.
I can't apply to 3 schools all ED, because if I got into all 3, then I'm bound to all 3, and that's impossible.
And they might all if they find out, they'll rescind the offer and that you won't have a spot for any of them.
The tried and true, what, you know, college planners usually say about having the 3 buckets, like the safeties, the target, and the reach. Is that still true today?
Yeah.
People still do that? Okay. But what I heard from college planners is you need to apply to more schools now than before because of the competitive nature of it. Is that true?
So there is a slight increase of the average number of schools that kids are applying to because of, I think, a lot of the test optional. So now you have more applicants coming to a school. Years before, they might have had 10,000 applications. Now they're getting 20,000, just to give you an example. So we do see an increase of number of students. However, I think you're doing your child a disservice by applying to 20 schools. That is not good for their mental health. It's not good for the school. It's not helpful to the teachers. And it's just, it should, if you do your work ahead of time, you should have a balanced list of maybe 10 to 12 schools.
Wow. Okay. That is such good advice. Yeah. Because, and that's the thing, like, it seems like from things that I've read, it can be such an emotionally taxing process for students,
Yes.
especially when they have their heart dead set on a school and then they get that rejection letter feeling like I'm not worthy,
Yeah.
I'm not good enough. Like,
Yeah, I've heard stories of students who've applied to 20 schools,
yeah,
12 rejection letters.
yeah,
That is not serving any purpose. If you know your numbers aren't in there, I don't have a problem with a few reaches. Of course, I think you should.
right.
But when you go that route, knowing that it's an unattainable reach, it's just not. And it also keeps the child from really focusing on the schools that do want them and are the right fit.
Yeah.
And so I'd rather them have more target schools than reach schools, and maybe have two, what I like to call likely schools.
Yeah, I like that. And like even like with the reach schools, like there's so many qualified candidates applying to the Ivies that like sometimes people are getting rejected not because they're not qualified, but just because it's just not what Yale needs at that
Right.
point in time for their class. So guys, your worth has nothing to do with where you get accepted. Just know that, like, you're a very valuable student. You have a lot to offer the world. If a school doesn't want you, it has nothing to do with you a lot of the times. They just have certain types of students that they need. They need to round out their class.
And I also warn students too, not everyone needs to know where you're applying,
Yeah.
because it can be hurtful if you're telling everyone and then you have to go through telling someone you rejected. Keep it close. I feel very strongly.
Keep it close to your chest.
It's a process unlike anything you've gone through before. And it's the first time a lot of students are getting rejected.
Right.
And they've done so much good in the world and good academically. And it's a tough thing to share with the whole world. But it's really important to share it with the ones that are close to you and that really care about your process,
Like your family.
and your counselor
Right.
and your best friend. But I don't think it's something to be announcing on social media.
Right. I feel the same way with test scores. I always tell my students, like, I'll never share your test scores with anyone. I keep them completely confidential. It's your place if you want to share how you did.
Right.
But kids can get so competitive with that. Like, after a test, everybody's like, what did you get? What did you get? And when you don't get that score that you want, then it's like, like you don't need to share that with anyone. They don't need to know. So I guess that being said, the one other thing I wanted to touch on before we move to the next thing is with the early decision, because some things that I've heard about early decision is because you're bound to it, you can't really shop around. Like people get financial packages, they get different offers. So what would you say to people about that? Like, do you recommend people still do one ED? And yeah, like how do you approach that with people?
I do recommend ED because you have your highest chance of admission from the top schools,
Right.
without question. Most of the top schools are going to give you a really good package because they have the money to give. So, but if you want to shop around, then it's in a case by case basis, like to then look and let's say, okay, what does your list look like? What's the best opportunity cost for you? Is it better for you than to apply regular decision to all these schools? And that way you can later on call a financial office, which you can do, and say, this school offered me this, you offered me this. Is there any way you can help? Because this is the school I really want to go to.
Now, that being said, I just thought of this, like when schools are looking to accept you ED, do they look at your financial means? Do they consider your parents' salaries?
Usually in early decision, no.
Okay.
Where it plays a role, and not at every school. Again, some schools have huge, especially the Ivy League schools, as I said, again, they don't need to, but there are schools that are what's called need aware.
Yeah.
That happens in regular decision when you're down to the last few spots and you realize that a lot of your merit money or your scholarship money is depleted.
Right.
Then unfortunately but it's such a small number.
Okay.
If you're in the process, I mean, if you're a good applicant, it's not going to impact you.
Yeah.
But it's called need aware.
I think you make a good point too with the endowments, because like all those schools that are like top tier, like they've got billions of dollars of endowment money. So like, yeah. Okay. Wow. This is so good so far. I love that. So, all right, guys. So, that being said, with all the stuff Amy shared about early action, early decision, comment below. Are you applying early action or early decision? And also, what schools are you looking to apply to? Okay. So now we are moving on to more students apparently are working with college planners now more than ever.
Correct.
What is going on with that? Why do you think that is?
First of all, the nature of the competition of how much more competitive it is to get into schools. That's a big part of it. I think there's an extra level of stress with students now, in addition to what they have to do for school, as well as outside of school activities.
I mean, I'm stressed out for them, and I'm not even doing this stuff.
And let's face it, high school college counselors there's just, they don't have the time in the summer, they don't have the time in the evenings to be able to answer those quick questions or to help nurture a student in their strategy, long-term strategy. They're wonderful to be supportive.
Right.
And we as college counselors, I very much try never to impose on I want to compliment what they do. I'm not
Right.
trying to step on anyone's toes.
Right.
My job is really working with the client to help shape their stories, what I talk about.
Cool.
Which a lot of times a high school counselor is there more for advice on academics and scheduling and helping with how the school can help get information from teachers into their systems. So my role really is to, and I think a reason why people are hiring them is to help shape their child's story so that no matter what school they go to, they can actually, when they submit their application, say, wow, I can't believe I did that. And I did it on my own. I'm already becoming independent. I'm going off to college. And now I did something outside of my own, like being told by someone else to do it. So it's shaping that, but also the stress levels down. Let's face it. If I told your 7-year-old to go wash his hands versus you telling your 7-year-old to wash their hands, who is he more likely to do it for? Right. So, and also it really is in some ways a life coaching position too, because I am that buffer as well as to help a lot with the stress and anxiety to say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Right. Well, and you used to work in college admissions, right? So you kind of have an inside look at, what admissions officers look for with applications. So I'm sure you can give students like a lot of valuable information for like how they can stand out too, right? Like on their applications, on their essays.
Yeah.
And also too, just to piggyback off of what you said with the school counselors, like from what I'm reading, it's like everything in public education or even in private schools. I don't want to generalize to public schools, but they're stretched very thin. I mean, their caseloads are huge at most of the schools across the country. Like it's really hard for a school counselor to devote so much time to you as an individual. Whereas, that's where, Amy can step in and really help you on a more supportive individual level because they just have so much on their plate, with the scheduling and all that stuff you were talking about.
And along those lines, don't be afraid, especially sophomore, junior year, to start making those appointments with your college counselor at a time, just to kind of, even if it's an email to give an update of what you've been doing, so that when you do have that meeting, ultimately, when they're writing the letter, that they have a little bit of background.
And that's what
not be afraid to kind of step forward and initiate that contact to develop the relationship.
Right.
And I always had the situation of my guidance counselor left. So then the nice thing is if you've already kept in contact in a short, brief way, somehow that they have it on record, some things you've done, or you've made a resume or CV, then you can encourage that counselor who's leaving to share any information that they have that you've shared with them so they already have a little bit of a file on you anyway.
That's such a good point. Yeah. I don't know if everybody knows this or not, but you guys have to have your guidance counselor write a letter of recommendation for you. So it is really important to make a relationship with them and to have them know who you are, especially if they're working with hundreds of kids. Like you want them to know your name. So start popping into their office, start making appointments like Amy was saying, and then they need 2 teacher recommendations too, right? So from some things that I read about that is like people have suggested getting a teacher who you actually faced an adversity in their class and overcame it.
Yeah, that's always strong, and sometimes can be the best recommendations.
Or on the flip side, people say it's good to ask a teacher who like they teach a subject that's in line with your intended major. Like if you're really strong in a certain subject to show your passion for it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, cool. Very good. So let's talk a little bit about Launch 4 then. So you just launched this company, no pun intended. And so like, can you kind of share with everybody a little bit more about what you do to paint a picture of the student to help them? How did you word it? You said that you help them
shape their story.
Shape their story. I love that. How do you help your clients shape their story and the students that come to you at Launch 4?
So first I try to go based on their interests and kind of develop that. And while you can change your major in college for the most part, it does help if you have some type of pinpoint focus when you're applying. So if you're going to apply for business, but you have nothing but a business course in high school, that's not going to help when you're going up against, especially at the top schools, students who've had maybe been part of an entrepreneurship club or they've started their own business. So you want to try to start to create that narrative so that their story can be shaped. So no matter what school they go to, they can say, hey, I actually have done this. And it's something I've learned these life skills that I can take with me no matter what job I get, what career I get, and no matter what school I go to. And so that's the really fun part of my job.
Yeah.
And we get and you also, there's a lot of answers in the nose. just like when you visit college campuses, there are a lot of answers in the notes.
Interesting.
So sometimes we will go down one path, maybe reach out to an incubator to see if we can get involved in an incubator based on an interest in chemistry. And maybe there's a lab company starting up.
Right.
And if that's the case, it might not work out. And that's okay, because students have to deal with, how much effort did you put to try to get it to happen? Did you at least talk to someone and learn some public speaking skills? And then from that might be like, you know what, I actually think I might rather do actual research. And then we can maybe contact someone we know and help with collecting data so that now they can be published in that professor's piece of work.
Wow,
So
that's really
it's
cool.
really fun work. It's super exciting, and it's just nice to brainstorm and do that. And also the other reason people look for someone like me is to help with time management, because as you know, schedules, it's already hard enough, and then parent schedules and sibling schedules. And so it is something where, because I've been through this so many times, to know, okay, this is when this happens, and now we're still on task, we're still fine.
Right.
But yet it does get stressful. And so it's a matter of making sure that the stress isn't too much, because they're not starting with me September of their final year of high school, which is awful.
Right.
A lot of my students start sophomore or junior year.
Good. But you do take seniors too,
I do take
right?
seniors. Yes,
You
I
have
do
like
take
a
seniors.
senior program.
Yeah, I do have a senior program for those students. But yeah, it's much easier to develop a story if they start earlier.
Right.
But yes, that's kind of where it's going. And then so that's, and one of the tips you were saying I was hoping to give students was, and then I always tell them, August 1st, the common application will reboot. It
Oh,
goes
you
down.
guys, wait, hang on. So this is the juicy tip.
Yeah, sorry.
She's getting into the juicy tip. Didn't even give me a chance to ask. Okay, go ahead. What's this juicy tip? Let's hear it.
They will reboot, and it will literally go down. So a lot of people get nervous.
What's going to reboot?
The Common App.
Okay.
Because they have to shut it down for a while to put up all the new information, the new requirements, the new deadlines, the new links, everything for every school.
And the Common App is where everybody goes to apply
most schools.
for most of the
Majority
schools.
Yeah. It's one-stop shopping. While there are different essay questions for individual schools in there,
Right.
It makes it a lot easier to apply. Some state schools do have their own application. There is no advantage to doing if they offer both. One or the other. Every admissions council will tell you that. But the Common App, so what a lot of people don't realize is right now you can actually start creating an online account and start filling out a lot. Fill out the profile section, fill out the academic section. The activity section is the one where I see a lot of mistakes.
Okay, tell me more.
I see a lot of spelling. I've seen spelling errors. And the other big one I see in the activities list, you have 10 spots to list activities. It's kind of like a CV if you're an international student. And then in those, most students on average fill it to 6 or 7. You don't have to have 10, just so you know, on average it's 6 to 7. And what they don't do is it says you have your name of the organization, your position, how many hours a week you do it. Okay.
Right.
But then there's a little spot that says description, and you have about 20 words in there to list and describe what you've done with either that club or that job or that internship. And too many students do not take that opportunity cost to fill it out. Or if they do fill it out, they're telling me something I already know, or they're missing an opportunity to tell me something, like even the acronym. They'll assume I know what an acronym means if it's the name of a club. I don't necessarily know what that means. So make sure that's, I don't know your school that well.
It needs to be clear.
Be clear. Okay, if you've had an if you've had an internship to talk about, did you engage with clients? Did you help with the presentation? Did you help look over financial charts? I mean, what did you do that shows me those life skills, leadership skills, collaborative skills?
So if you're interested in setting up a consult with Amy, you can go ahead and check out her website, and you'll get more information in there.
And that's the nice thing, as you know, all of our work is done by Zoom. I was doing Zoom before the pandemic. So it actually works. I'd love to meet students in person, as you do too. Yeah. It's nice that we are able to do things virtually.
All right, Amy, thank you so much for being on today. It was so awesome having you.
Thank you for listening. We appreciate it. And liking, appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for sticking around till the end. If you made it to the end of this video, go ahead and comment below college planning. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you again soon.
See, you're a good friend.